My name is Maniza Naqvi, and this is the 35th episode of the Little Book Company podcast. I have to confess here that my guest today is special for me, and I'm talking today to Maria Laura Sanchez Puerta. Laura is a traveler, wanderer, writer, mother. She's an Argentine economist at the World Bank. And she has written a novel memoir about her own love story against all odds called Just in Time. The ebook version is on the Little Book Company digital platform. Welcome, Laura.
Hi, Maniza. Thank you so much for the introduction. Very thrilled to be here.
It's great to have you. And I welcomed you before I completed my introduction, which I'm going to do now at the World Bank. You and I were in the same practice called the Social Protection and Jobs practice. I was on the social protection side of that practice, and you were on the job side of the practice. And I would like you to tell our audience, our listeners, why social protection and jobs and labor markets are so intricately and intimately linked, and what is that elegant dance between the two for podcast?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Yeah, my background is my PhD in economics on labor economics at Cornell University. So I was always interested in working on labor markets in the development world. That's how I ended up at the World Bank, and it still is my dream job. Not only for the work that we do, but also for the great colleagues that we have at the bank, like you, Maniza. So the unit where I started was I think it was called Social Protection and Labor in the beginning, and then it was called Jobs, and the unit Jobs became a unit on its own because it's such a cross-cutting issue that deals with pretty much all the sectors at the World Bank. To have, having a good job is the best way of getting yourself out of poverty. So for that, you need skills, you need good health, you need to have good roads to get to your job, etc., etc., etc. So in the beginning, it was in the social protection and labor and jobs unit, because you need to have good human capital, and the programs that the social protection unit provides and supports countries with help all the poor and vulnerable be able to have the skills and the means to have a good job, which is one of the most fulfilling things that a human can have.
Okay. And just because for the sake of argument, not every, vulnerability, which is the side that I worked on, not everyone can have a job, and not, there are many other ways out of poverty, are they not? Because there must be some things that are the responsibility of governing institutions. For example, Laura, I will ask you, what do these things play in creating good jobs? For example, mobility and universal healthcare and housing, affordable housing, public transportation. What roles do these play?
Yes, I know, in complete agreement. I think I have a two-part answer maybe to your question. So on one hand, when we talk about jobs, especially for the poor and vulnerable, we are not talking about the usual formal wage job that is most common in developed countries. So jobs at the World Bank is something very encompassing, and it includes also what self-employed entrepreneurs and farmers, anybody who is not dependent on an employer or with a formal contract. So when we talk about jobs, we are very wide and encompassing. And then when I started at the World Bank, I started in Europe and Central Asia before I went to the global unit. And with Arup Banerjee, we had this framework that was called MILES. And for each one of the letters of MILES, we included some areas that are needed to have good jobs. So M was for the macro situation, that the country had to have a good macroeconomic situation and be stable to be able to have good job creation. Investment climate was the I. The L was for labor, and in general, we were talking about labor regulations that would protect the workers, but would not be so so restrictive that then there would not be any formal labor job creation, because it's too difficult for the firms to pay such steep taxes, for example. And then we had the E for education and the S for social protection. So with social protection, I think we also included, the health aspect that you were alluding to. So definitely jobs encompasses all sorts of areas, and I think it was a great idea to have it as its own unit, because we needed to be in touch with transport, as you were saying, like good roads, safety, agriculture for some of the jobs in some of the developing countries we work for, and so on and so forth. Not sure if that was what you were looking at, looking for.
Can I ask another question now that I'm sitting outside the bank?
Sure.
And I'm just wondering, is labor market theory that's been developed to date and that's used to prescribe policy, especially at the World Bank, is it skewed towards industrialization and the efficiencies, quote unquote, that come with that and scale, in opposition to things like small farms and very small income generating businesses?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think we have had a few flagship reports that have been looking at jobs in a very wide spectrum. So I think that the theories have evolved, and of course what we see in the developed world, where definitely most jobs are formal and in the urban areas and so on and so forth. Then we have developing countries where most of the jobs are in agriculture, and we are trying to see what is the best model for each country to grow, to create jobs, both formal and informal if needed, because what we are looking at is as the person, and we're trying to get the most earnings for each person who works. And we are also evolving in the way that the social protection of the workers is not tied to the specific job that they have, but is more general. Otherwise, that makes it very skewed to formal jobs and creates a lot of distortions, given that formalization is not very common in our client countries. So I think things have been evolving. It's very hard, and it's very different in every country, but I think we have been adjusting to the different contexts.
And in terms of different contexts, I just want to let our listeners know that you have worked in Egypt. You were based in Egypt and covered Yemen and Djibouti, and now you're in South America covering Andean countries.
Yes. Yes, it has been an amazing experience to go from the US to these different parts of the world, and to work with the governments directly in such diverse contexts. So yeah, Yemen with active conflict, very, very hard to work with. Djibouti, a very, very tiny country and with a lot of restrictions. because they don't have a lot of natural resources, and then Egypt with huge urban areas, 30 million people living in Cairo is just a crazy experience. But in general, because we focus on the poor and the vulnerable in each of the countries, as I was saying, we're trying to work with the earnings that they make and trying to make the most out of their skills, reskilling them, connecting them to value chains that are growing. So this is what we call the economic inclusion programs, a la BRAC. And I think that was the last job that I had in DC before I moved to the different regions, and I became an expat of a different sort, because I was always an expat coming from Argentina. And I wanted to say that I'm always a labor economist, but since I moved to Egypt, I took another role, a wider role, a little bit more managerial. So I am still the Human Development Program leader for these countries. So I cover also health, education, and social protection and jobs, which makes me have a better overview of the human capital in the countries.
And what do you find in terms of commonalities between Egypt, Yemen, Djibouti as one bloc, and your current countries in the Andean nations? What are the commonalities in terms of labor markets and poverty and inequity?
That's a very, very good question. I think throughout the developing world, it's the high level of informality in all of our countries. So that is, I think, our biggest challenge. And when there's informality and the social security is tied to formal jobs, then you have other further challenges, right? When there is this vulnerability and this falling in and out of poverty, because there are so many shocks that these populations are going against. And right now, I think one of the new things is our focus on climate change. So we're trying to also make the households and the workers more resilient to the shocks of climate change. We also are trying to add the layer of the digital economy, and I'm learning a lot about artificial intelligence. I think I'm quite behind on that. I'm trying to catch up, but there are quite a few things that we're trying to add to our agenda to support these populations.
So I was asking for commonalities. Is there also a historical commonality in their governance structures?
What do you mean?
Well, the Andean countries would include which countries?
It's Ecuador, Chile, Bolivia, and Peru.
Okay. And you were working on Egypt and Djibouti and Yemen before. And in terms of authoritarian structures historically, is there a commonality that would have contributed to poverty and inequality?
I think that's the toughest of all the questions I've asked. I don't think that I have the knowledge, and I don't think I have read enough about the historical sources of poverty of these countries, and let alone the commonality between the two regions that I've worked with. But I can talk a little bit about how things are right now, and how the governments are right now, and how they have different policies, depending on who is in power.
Yes.
So on historically, not so much, but yeah, I mean, I don't even have to look at commonalities. We have enough diversity here in the Andean countries to have plenty to discuss. But I think the countries have been going, left and right and left and right. So it's very hard to maintain a coherent policy on any ground, pretty much, when the government changes so completely, from one area to a political party to another. But in some of the ministries, fortunately, the technical people and some of the directors, the people we have been working with remain. So then some of these policies are more ingrained, and they can continue to support the programs that we think that make sense. And in other cases, some things are dismantled, and we have to start from scratch. So I guess, yeah, it all depends, but definitely it has something to do with what happens with poverty in a country and with growth, which is of course very much related.
Mm-hmm. And and also related to it might be the historical, elite capture because of authoritarian government structures, intransparent government structures that might also contribute to poverty.
Yeah, that's not the focus of what I work on. So I focus on the human capital areas. So definitely, I mean, inequality is rampant in all of these countries. That's definitely another commonality that I think informality is one of the ways in which it's shown. But yeah, definitely there is concentration of wealth at the top, and then there's so much inequality that you see in some Latin American countries more than in others. But there is definitely like regional disparities in Chile, which is an OECD country, and you would think that they have solved many of these poverty and inequality issues. We still have plenty of challenges because it's such a long country where it's very hard to reach a lot of the vulnerable populations.
Yes. And Chile also tells a story, and its historical story in the 20th century is something that resonates much with countries. The governance structure in Chile in the last many decades resonates very much with countries like Egypt or Pakistan and elsewhere where you've had military governments.
Yeah, and Argentina as well.
Yeah. Yes, and your homeland, Argentina. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And how can I forget that, Laura? I'm speaking to you. And I can see that as we are discussing this, you and I are both being very careful with the language we're using. And now I'd like to segue into the fact that you have written a novel memoir.
Yes.
Which is a very different approach. It's about passion, isn't it?
Yes. Do you want me to tell you a little bit about what it is about without spoiling?
Absolutely. That is exactly what we want to talk about. We want to talk about your novel memoir, Just in Time, and I want you to speak about Morgan and how you met, and tell us some of the story.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, the book is called Just in Time, A Story of Love, Loss, and a New Beginning. It was originally written in Spanish, my native tongue, and then a friend of mine, my best friend, actually, she really wanted to read it, so she actually paid for the translation from like a native English speaker. So I'm very excited that we have this version as well. Thank you. Thanks to my friend Kieran. So the book starts with the story about how I met my husband, Morgan. And this was through the Match.com application. It was the first time that I was exploring online dating, and it was a little bit overwhelming in the beginning, and I decided I was going to be proactive, and I was going to be looking at the profiles and starting a conversation. I was not going to be waiting for a guy to reach out to me and be the right among the matches, right, that you get. You could also be proactive.
So you went on to Match.com on the online dating service in Washington, D.C. I mean, it's everywhere, but you were in Washington, D.C.
Yes.
And
So
and
I'm
tell our,
Argentinian, but I ended up in the US when I was 25, as I said, for my PhD. And then since age 30, I was in DC. I was traveling a lot with the World Bank. And then when I was spending time in DC, I was trying to have, like a more normal dating life, but it was very hard to find the right match or a match at all, actually. So I
I
thought,
hear you. I hear you, sister. I mean, what is the ratio in Washington, D.C. to men and
it's terrible. Yeah, it's terrible for
1 to 7,
women.
I think.
Yes, something
Yeah.
crazy like that. So then a friend of mine suggested this. So I was like, okay, let me try. I looked at, of course, my best picture ever. And then I went. So the first guys who were approaching me were guys in motorcycles in the pictures, and they were like, I like speed, I like I don't know, adventure, and I really don't like motorcycles, and I didn't want anything like that would be so dangerous as like speed and motorcycles. So I was like, I'm not liking how this program is working, so I'm going to look for myself. So that's how I ended up trying to find some variables to narrow the search. And some were education, so someone who would live in the vicinity of where I was in Roslyn. So then there were lots of guys who were very well educated and lived in Virginia, in Northern Virginia. So I added the word tennis in it, so that the person would have to have written tennis in the profile, not just said, tick a box that I like sports and I like tennis, but actually in the description of themselves, they would have had to write that they love tennis or something along those lines. And that's how the search became the results were very narrow, because I only got 2 or 3 guys. And I winked at them, and Morgan replied quite quickly, and he loved tennis. And we met at Starbucks, I remember, in Roslyn, that was in between Courthouse and Roslyn, where he lived and I lived. And they closed the Starbucks on us because we were like talking so much, and we were so engaged in getting to know each other that time passed very quickly. And in one of the first dates, he told me that the year before he had had a tumor in his back, a very large tumor in his back. He had had a few surgeries at Johns Hopkins University Hospital, and radiation. It had been very hard, but he was doing great right now. We even played tennis in our one of our first dates, but they had taken his whole sacrum bone out. They had put titanium bars in his back, and they had left a little bit of tumor because they couldn't reach it. So at the end of that day, they said, "Well, what was the name of your very rare tumor?" And he said, myxopapillary ependymoma. I went back home that night. I Googled that very difficult word, 2 words, myxopapillary ependymoma. And there weren't many studies coming up. I continued, I persisted, and I found one scientific paper that had a few cases where they mentioned that if the tumor was taken completely out, that it would never recur, it would never come back. That's why they call the myxopapillary ependymoma a benign tumor. But if they left a little bit of the tumor, then the chances of it coming back and the person having metastasis and dying was like around 40%. So that was definitely very shocking to read. And I sent a paper to my sister, who's a biologist, to make sure that I was understanding the odds well and that I wasn't misreading this scientific paper. She confirmed that I was right. And it was like my sister, my mom, my dad, and I think a few other people like I had been talking with those days. They were really not able to help me make the decision that I needed to make, which was, do I continue with this guy whom I just met, and I already like a lot, or do I just go separate ways and nobody's going to blame me because it was such a hard decision that I had to make at that time. So it was really the decision one of the few decisions that I made in my life without having any inputs from anybody else, because nobody could really get in my shoes for such a hard decision. And the way I made it was like, I kept thinking about it. I never told Morgan that I knew this. I think that he never knew that either, that I don't think the doctors at Johns Hopkins share that information. So I thought I broke up with Morgan, then I met someone else, and that person was run over by a car in a car accident or something like that. And I immediately knew that I only wanted to take any chances with Morgan. Like, I didn't want to take any chances with anybody else. I didn't care. So it was very clear to me, and I decided that I was never going to think about this anymore. I was going to live life to the fullest. And then, of course, with the checkups that he needed to do every 6 months in the beginning, then after a year. So it was the toughest decision of my life, and it was the best decision of my life.
That is so beautiful, Laura, that when it came to your personal, to your heart, you didn't make any calculations. You were in love, and that's all that mattered for as long as it would last.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So tell me some more about those moments and the life that you lived.
Yeah. So the book starts like that. What I just mentioned, that I met him like that. I made the decision, and then I couldn't be more convinced that he was the love of my life. I had a few boyfriends before Morgan, and I feel like they were not. I don't know how to put it, but he made me the best person that I could be. Like, the way Morgan was very calm, very confident. When I think I was a little bit spoiled maybe as a girlfriend or something before. Like, I would get upset or jealous at small things, and maybe initiate fights, and with him, like, he was so clear that if I was going to do any of that, I was going to, he was not going to be responding to those things. Like, he was very, I don't know, like he
was very clear,
very confident as well, huh?
Evolved and clear.
Yes, somehow he never got into fights with me, and it was definitely the best relationship I ever had, and I thought it was a great a model for my kids, even though they were very little when the illness recurred, and then very, very little also when Morgan died. But I think it was so wonderful to see his huge smile when we found out I was pregnant with our first son, Julian, and that was quite quickly. I mean, we were not super young when we met. I think I was 33, 34. He was 40. He had just turned 40. So it was something very. We were welcoming, growing the family, and it was wonderful. We had this CD, this songs, baby songs with John Lennon's music that I still like have in my head whenever I see a baby or whenever I imagine those times. There was such a beautiful, peaceful time, sunny time in DC when Julian, our first son, was born. So yeah, I mean, we continued to play tennis. He didn't want to travel very much because he was afraid that something would happen, and doctors or hospitals in other countries would not be able to treat him. But I think I managed to convince him that Argentina was not such a third world country that would not have very good doctors and very good hospitals. So we managed to go there a few times. We went on a cruise. We went to Brazil together, and of course we traveled a lot within the U.S. because his family was in California at that time. So I have, I mean, the best memories of those first 5 years when he was totally healthy, and we had a quote unquote normal life in DC. We didn't get married in the beginning. I think I never really cared for the paperwork or for that. I think I just needed to trust that we were both in it for the long haul. And the way it happened was that I think when we found out that I was pregnant, the proposal was like, let's buy a house together. And in DC with the 30-year mortgage, it was a nice long-term commitment that we made together. So we had a really nice townhouse in Roslyn, and we raised we had our kids there, and we raised our kids together for the first years in that neighborhood.
So Laura, let's take a pause right here and we'll come right back, huh?
Yes, thank you.
So Laura, you had 6 years with Morgan?
We were together for 7.5 years, but the first 5 were the ones when he was totally healthy, and then the last 2.5 were an adventure with the hospitals and the surgeries, and a lot of things that I tell in the book, just for me to process so many things and so many decisions that we had to make on those last years.
Mm-hmm. But you knew before you got involved with Morgan that those last 2.5 years would also come.
Yeah, so when I made the decision, I knew that the chances were quite big, like 40% probability. I didn't think it was certainty, but definitely there were huge chances of the tumor recurring. So when actually 5 years exactly after we met, we were playing tennis again, and we didn't play tennis that often, but many things happened while we were playing tennis. So he said that he had a pain in his back again, and we thought it had been something related to some movement when we were playing tennis. He went back to the doctor, and the MRI showed that the tumor had started to grow again. So it was terrible. Like, it was very shocking for all of us, mainly for Morgan and his family, I think. I feel like I had been warned by the research that I had done. So in the grief steps that one goes through, I feel like I skipped the first one. Like, why me? Why did that happen to us? What did I do? Or something along those lines, that I think is the first step of the surprise. And I did not go through that. I feel like I was quite ready I don't know why, and I don't know how, because the things that I tell in the book and the things that I went through in a country that was not my own, far from my family and far from Morgan's family, having a demanding job, very, very understanding job as well, but a full-time job after all, and having two little kids while my husband was going through this terrible illness was difficult, and somehow I managed to live it in a optimistic and serene way.
Optimistic and serene, and now you had two children. You had Julian and you had a daughter.
Yes, Clarita.
And the children were so young, and even in these last 2.5 years, there was a lot of love.
I think I lost you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, now it's fine.
I said in these last 2 years of Morgan's life, there was still a lot of love, and you were still steadfast in your choice.
There was more love than ever, I would say. Yes, I mean, I think Morgan was the best patient one could ever have, and for me, it was such a privilege and honor to be by his side all of that time, and all through the different decisions that we have to make, difficult situations, emergency room visits, and surgeries. And there were times when there were so many surgeries in his back that they couldn't even close his back, and he had to have this sponge absorbing the liquid attached to a machine that was absorbing all of these. So things that required intense care that in the US you only get if you are at the hospital, but they don't want you at the hospital a long time. So it was very challenging to try to stay at the hospital when there were things that I didn't think I could manage at home. And then it was challenging when we were at home, because we had pretty much like an hospital room set up in our townhouse to take care of antibiotics that had to be given intravenously, and I think it was a year before Morgan passed away that he couldn't feel his legs anymore, so he wasn't able to walk anymore. And you can imagine that, living with someone who is in a wheelchair needs a lot more attention that one person can give, and there was not a lot of we didn't have many nursing hours with the insurance. So somehow, with the visits of our family and with friends and with my work allowing me to work from home before COVID, I was already starting to do some work from home. I remember those days. So I think it was, it was very difficult, but I still remember that with so much love and calmness, and somehow he was so wise and loving and sweet to me and to the kids and to the family, and it was just a terrible but an incredible experience to go through with him.
Yeah, and I'm just imagining that Morgan was probably also trying to make good memories for his children.
Yes, there are so many. So I wanted to say that that in the US, I think the culture is very open. regarding cancer and death, and these are topics that are not taboo like they are in Latin America, at least definitely in Argentina. Growing up, talking about death was not, I feel like my mom still doesn't think that she likes, not that nobody really likes talking about death, but she avoids it as much as she can. But in the US, it was very nice to have all these NGOs or institutions that we could go to for therapy, for art therapy, for guidance, at all the stages that we were going through. So many of these places allowed us or give us the space or the advice on how to enjoy every stage as a family, and how to be open about it, and how to continue living each day to its fullest. So yeah, Morgan liked to read to the kids. Morgan's sister, always when she came to visit us from California, Morgan's his room, like what we had set up, was in our very nice basement, and she was upstairs, and Morgan and I were downstairs a lot, especially when he wasn't able to walk. So we had built a ramp through the basement outside to be able to take fresh air every day and things like that. But we were downstairs and she would be upstairs, and she always mentions how she loved listening to us laughing. Like we were always joking and laughing, and to this day, like she thinks that that's incredible, that some people live together with their partners for many years, but they maybe don't have the bond or the fun or the love that Morgan and I shared. So I think that is really true, that he was a very funny guy, and we managed to laugh until the end. Of course, we cried too, but there was a lot of joy, and also with the kids. So there are also these organizations that allow you to fulfill your dreams when you are already in hospice care. So 6 months before he died, there was metastasis of the tumor. There was not more radiation that we could do, no more surgeries. And they said that Morgan could go into the hospice care institution, or we could do it at home. And I chose to stay home, to spend more time with him, with the kids. Otherwise, it would be, I think, logistically impossible. The place that they were offering was not close to our place. So even though the support was way less when you stay home, I thought that was the best decision we could have had. And in those months, we would go to the NBA to see Manu Ginobili, who's best friends with my cousin, my first cousin. So we went to see him play, and then he came to say hi to us, and he gave us his autograph. We did the same with Ethan Hawke, who was presenting his book in, I forget the name of the place in DC where he presented, but he came to talk to us after the show, and also signed the book that I still have. And then we went to a musical, and there were, I think we had an opportunity to go to Disney World with one of these Dream Foundation, something like that, but we couldn't do that one because Morgan was already too sick to take the kids there. But there are many opportunities, and many people who can support through these tough times, and I thought that was wonderful in the US, given that we couldn't be so close to our families.
And as I listen to you talking, Laura, it comes to me that the length of time is really immaterial. And what is time? It's the experience, the moments that you had that was so, all of it from end to end was joyful, and loving and open and full of generosity and kindness and honesty.
Yeah.
Did Did you learn this in your own family with your mom and dad? What was that like when you were growing up?
I think from my mom and dad, uh, I learned that the only things that you can control in life are your attitude and the effort that you put. So everything else, uh, I mean, maybe when I was younger, I used to be a little bit like more prone to complaining about things. But I kind of quickly realized that, yeah, that attitude and effort are the things that are in my hands. And I think that was a very helpful lesson. I didn't learn it like very quickly, but definitely it was something that was in my mind throughout the relationship with Morgan and throughout the tough things that we had to go through. So yeah, I didn't think it was a choice. There was a choice of complaining about what was happening. I thought, given what is happening, let's make the most out of it, and that's what we did.
And your dad, you lost your dad as well in an accident, no?
Yes. So I was 9 months pregnant with Julian when my sister called me to tell me that my dad had been in a car accident. It was so shocking to hear that and not to know exactly what was going on. I didn't know if there was hope that my dad could survive. I think he was in a coma at that time when she called me. I didn't have a lot of details, but I knew for sure that I couldn't travel to Argentina being 9 months pregnant. So incredibly difficult to go through that. I still remember Morgan by my side every night while I was crying and crying, and he was super healthy at the time. He would still console me if he had been sick, but at that time it was the beginning of our relationship, so he was great support to me, and yeah, my sister and my half brother had to be there through the few weeks where there were tough decisions to make. But finally, yeah, my dad didn't make it. I know that he didn't suffer much, so that is some consolation, because he really, I think that he feared being old and not being able to live life, to its fullest. He would play basketball a few times a week. He had a farm and he would drive there many times a week, and on the way back from the farm, from the land, is when the accident happened. He collided against a big truck. So in some way, I feel like he lived his 72 years very happily and very fully, and I'm still sorry that I wasn't able to be there for the last hours, but that's a recollection that I have, that I was able to be with him in spirit, and that Morgan was by my side very much. Yeah, like I think maybe he taught me a lot of how I was going to be by his side later on, how one can be loving and supportive in a couple.
And again, that time is not as important as that the time you do have should be lived to the fullest and with awareness.
Yes, and I hope my kids take on, of course, for them much harder than for anybody else. They lost their father. Clara doesn't remember much. She was 4 when Morgan died. She was 2 when Morgan, 1.5 when Morgan got sick again. So it's hard not to have a father, the role model that he was, and that's one of the reasons why I wrote this book. So one first reason why I wrote the book was because I felt like I had so many thoughts feelings in my head and in my heart that I needed to put them on paper to move on. Um, uh, and there were like many decisions that we had to make throughout the 2.5 years, and I wanted to have some clarity that we had made the best decisions at each point with the information that we had, and that's something that became very clear when I was writing the book, that there was some confusion in my mind, that maybe there could have been something that we could have done, and I didn't want to have that feeling in the years to come. So it was incredibly powerful, the experience to write the book, to allow me to have the peace that I have with the story. And then, of course, I wanted this story to be there for my kids for whenever they are ready to read it. Of course, they lived it, and of course, we talk about Morgan a lot, and we have pictures and videos, but I think this is a nice memory for them to have forever.
Yes.
And then some of my best friends read the first draft of the book, and they thought that it was something that needed to be shared as an inspiring, life story, love story for people who might be going through similar challenges. So I do think that one can live these things. In my circumstances, I mean, I didn't live that first step of grief because I already knew what I was getting into, and that's not generally the case. But in any case, I think the lesson is that living, the only thing that we have is the present. So that's all that we can do, like live it to its fullest.
And I think I'm going to add a little bit to that and say that when love comes your way, don't start analyzing the why, the whats and whens and wheres and the cost benefit analysis. Just go for it. Don't let it go.
Yeah. Definitely the best decision that I've made. No regrets.
You're a very fortunate person, Laura. No regrets and a beautiful life. And you have 2 children, and who you're raising as a single parent.
Yes. With since Morgan died in 2016, after I finished the paperwork and organized finances and logistics and everything that one has to do when things like this happened, I thought that it would be great for my kids and I to go on an adventure, given that when we were in DC, Morgan had a job with the federal government, so we couldn't move to another country. Otherwise, he would not be able to keep his job. So I was thinking that I was going to live in DC all my life, and I would continue to travel. But when these plans changed, I sold our house and I moved to this new position in Cairo with the kids, and it's been wonderful. I think the kids keep learning, keep making new friends, and of course it's hard to adjust, many adjustments for my little kids throughout their lives. Hopefully that is something that they will cherish when they are older. But yeah, I'm not going to say that raising 2 teenagers, they are 13 and 14 right now, is easy, but it's a nice adventure doing it here in Peru now, and wherever my next position takes me, because as you know, these positions are 3 to 5 years, and we'll continue moving at least one more time with the kids until they finish high school.
So I want to paint a picture of you from my memory of a sunny day in Istanbul when I have arrived at a jobs conference 2 days earlier than when the conference is to begin. And a bunch of us are waiting for you to join us because you're not staying at the hotel we are staying at. You're actually staying at some youth hostel. You come up this slope, you have 2 pigtails, you sunburned, freckles across your nose, you're wearing culottes, a tank top and sandals, and you have a backpack. And you've got a huge smile on your face. You are completely free, you're nomadic, you're like a hippie almost. And that's, I said, look at her. Look at her, she's sunshine itself.
What a lovely picture, what a lovely picture. You were there with your sister, with your lovely sister, and with Dina. It was so wonderful, such an amazing, magical city. This was before I met Morgan, I think, so I was definitely completely free at that time.
Well, Laura, thank you so much for having this conversation with me today.
It was wonderful. Thank you.
I hope that our listeners will cherish it as much as I cherish it. Thank you.
Thank you, Maniza.
Bye for now.